Hello and welcome to this very special Hay Festival Book Club event. I'm Georgina Godwin, host of Meet the Writers on Monocle Radio. Hay Festival is a charity with year-round activities to connect audiences with artists. Thank you to everyone for their continued support and engagement. Now, The Bookseller of Kabul by Åsne Seierstad is the Hay Festival Book Club pick for July, and copies are available for purchase on the Hay Festival website, or you can buy a copy from your local bookseller. Hay Festival Book Club is supported by Unwin Charitable Trust. You can find past events available to rewatch free online now. And speaking of charities, if freedom of expression and the power of words are important to you, please do consider joining English Pen, the writers' human rights organisation open to both readers and writers. Now, it's time to get as cosy as I am here. And forgive me if there are a few little snuffles, but hopefully no barking, because my Springer Spaniel Bella is also a lover of literature, and she is now sitting at my feet down. So I am absolutely delighted to be in conversation with Åsne Seierstad, who's a journalist and a writer whose extraordinary body of work has chronicled the impact of war, repression, and resistance across the world. Åsne, welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're in Oslo right now.
Yes, I'm in the heat of Oslo. We have a heat wave here, and it's never ever happened that we have this what is called tropical nights.
Extraordinary. Well, of course, you and I have met before in the tropical nights, the feverish nights of Hay, perhaps. And I think the first time we met was at a dinner party given in some terribly remote place where we couldn't remember where you were staying. We were driving back at 3 o'clock in the morning round the rural roads, trying to identify one cottage from many other identical ones. It was quite a crazy night.
Well, I always have happened to get problems in Hay. Like I travel around the world on the most in the most terrible places, and then in Hay I always forget where I stay. And once I actually stayed a night at the police station.
No, why?
Yes, and it was not because of excessive drinking or anything like that, but sometimes in Hay you stay in private houses, and then sometimes there's like you have a key, there's some other people there, and then they close at 9. And I never thought I should bring a key, and I got back much later, knocked on the door, nobody hears me. I knock and knock and knock. And in the end, the driver just says, the only place now we have to, take you to the police. And the police were like, oh, so this is like 20 years ago. And so what we're going to do with you? And then they gave me a room. I slept on the floor because it's not like until the morning. And then I could go back to my house and get a cup of coffee and then onto the show. And so it's always something interesting happening.
Absolutely, but your whole life has been interesting, and I'm guessing that's not the first time you've slept on the floor, because I want to begin with your work before Afghanistan, because you were already a war correspondent covering places like Chechnya, Iraq, the Balkans. I wonder if you just tell us a little bit about that period. What kind of stories were you drawn to then, and how did it shape you as a reporter?
Well, my first war was Chechnya, as you mentioned. I was just in my 20s when Boris Yeltsin, the president at the time, invaded Chechnya, which we now see, is a prelude to Ukraine. But back then, I was kind of this student correspondent without money, so I lived with a Russian family. I rented a room, and at this time, at 1994, it's like you don't have phones, there's no internet. So actually, in order to get the story, you had to go there right away. And I got a lift with the Russian army because who else goes when you have no money? So I flew in. I just went to the Minister of Defense. That was possible in the 90s. Minister of Defense in Russia, asking if they had a seat on the plane to Chechnya. And they were like, well, we don't really recommend you going at all. And I insisted, and then they gave me just a piece of paper with a handwritten note, like, this is your ticket. And then coming there to Chechnya, I had no plans, no contacts, nothing. and it was getting dark, and the fighting would start in the evening. And I saw this young woman with 2 water buckets. And I was thinking, she's a safe person to ask for a place to stay. And she just looked at me and said, come with me. And then I went with her and up a little path. And that was a house just packed with women. And this was actually just one family. So it was a mother, all her daughters, and all the wives of her sons who were fighting against the Russians in the mountains. And this house was actually my first war story, because there was a birth there. There was one of the 17-year-old daughters gave birth. It was like, and I think that was a bit, as you asked me, what has influenced me, or my kind of reporting has been very much staying with families. And in the beginning, it was out of necessity, like I had no money or I had no contacts, and you just have to stay close to the civilians living there. But later, I think it just became, I understood that is the way to understand a war or a conflict or a society. You need to get to know the people. And very often, like when you're out of questions, that is when their life starts. Like when you've, was that all? Have you no more questions? Okay, so let's carry on then baking bread or feeding the kids or fetching, milking the cows or something like that. So yeah, that is. I don't like to call it a method, because it sounds so cold, but it's more like a way of reporting, even like a way of life.
And of course, that's exactly what you did with the Bookseller of Kabul. So let's talk about Afghanistan. Where do you think it all went wrong for the country? Was there a specific moment?
Yeah. Well, what's really started the tragedy was the Soviet invasion in Christmas Eve, 1979. But just before that, people also need to know, like, there was a coup in 1973. So until 1973, Afghanistan was one of the most prosperous countries in the region. Like, they had a king was ruling for 30 years, and it was, at least it was absolutely a country that looked forward. But then this king, liberal king, when he was in for eye treatment in Italy, and his cousin Daoud took over in a coup. The king never came back, and Daoud was then there was a coup against him, and then there was a very harsh battle between different fractions of the Communist Party in Afghanistan, some with Soviet support. So it was like, for those few years, there was lots of infighting and killing before the Soviet invasion. So an interesting thing also with this invasion was that the Soviets didn't even plan to fight themselves. They were just going to go there, post their tanks at the airport, and then that would be enough to settle peace in Afghanistan. And now we know the war, they did absolutely go into fight, and the war lasted for 10 years. 1.5 million Afghans lost their lives. 15,000 Soviet soldiers, which it seemed to be high at the time. Now that we know the numbers from Ukraine of soldiers' death, it was nothing, 15,000. Now it's already 10 or 20 times more. But anyway, that is also the birth of Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden went to fight, and Islamic extremism was born out of this conflict. And after the Soviets withdrew, the West thought that, okay, fine, done with Afghanistan, we can move out. And then, as we know, from the extremism that rose from 1989, civil war erupts for a few years, and 1996, Taliban, this new movement at the time nobody had heard about, came in and settled the scores and took over the country. And then the story starts with, of course, there's never been really any kind of equality in Afghanistan, but women were working, they were studying, they could travel. But from then on, it was on with the blue burqa. You couldn't show your hands, you couldn't show your feet, you absolutely not your face. And the Taliban at the time, women couldn't work, they couldn't study, girls couldn't go to school. So it was a total black nightmare for women. And then that lasted until 2001, when the bombing campaign after the terror attacks in New York and Washington, and George Bush started his bombing campaign. Unfortunately, it targeted, like, this is just a short line of the history, but one of the main mistakes happening was that not only did it target Al-Qaeda, that was doing the terror attack, but it was also targeted the Taliban, but with them the whole society. So for that reason, the war lasted for 20 years until the West withdrew in 2021. But those when I went there first time in 2001, covering the war, and coming into Kabul in November of 2001 after a few months of war, getting into Kabul the night after the Taliban had fled, and looking into a society that started playing music again. Not that the women took off their burqas right away, because there's always wary that change of regime situation. But this is how one day when I walk around in the streets and I see the sign bookshop on a wall, and I was thinking, wow, bookshop in Kabul, that's weird. And I go in and I see there's a man there who is preparing his new books for a new era, and that was very practical, because he in order to go with the censorship of the Taliban, they censored all pictures of living being, because in their form of Islam it's not allowed to depict nor animals nor people. So now he was taking off those little sheets of paper that he'd glued onto those pictures. So I was thinking, oh, that's a great little story for my newspaper, and then it became much more.
Much more than that, because you embedded with the family as you had done before in Chechnya. I wonder what it was about Sultan Khan and his household that made you want to center a book around their lives, and what kind of man was he? Because I gather that he was very different from, when he was being this kind of generous host at the bookshop, this erudite man, to this really what sounds like quite a tyrant at home.
Yes, well, so he's a complex person, and he has all those sides, and so it's not like he fooled anyone when he was a nice guy at the bookstore, because he loves books, and he's done so much for books, spreading of books in Afghanistan. So he's in that sense he's a great hero. So when I met him, he was very open, and he very much liked to talk to Western journalists, and he was interviewed everywhere. And one day he invited a bunch of us for dinner. And when we got there, he had, or his wives and his daughters had laid the floor, because all Afghan meals are on the floor. So we're sitting there around a long tablecloths, but like floor cloths, and with food. And when I was sitting there, I realized this is the first time in Afghanistan that I share a meal with women, because in the countryside, even me as a woman, I could never speak to the women there because they could see me. I could go into a room of women, but I couldn't speak to them because all the translators were male. So they couldn't even lift their voices if the translator was male. So I was like, for so long time, I'd never spoken to a woman. And I was thinking, and there, women and men sat together. So it was relatively liberal. And then during that meal, I was just thinking, this family is a book. So it was just this sudden idea. And then I sat there, I was thinking, I bet everyone in the room had the same idea. There was a woman from BBC, there was a Washington Post correspondent, there was from Rai, Italian television. So I was like, all of these people, they all got the same idea, I was sure. So in the car back, I was thinking, the first one who says it will do it. And I said, I'd like to write a book about that family. And they were like, oh yeah? All right, okay, yeah. So none of them had the idea. So I was just certain that they all wanted to write that book, but they had other things to do. So and then the next day, I went to the bookstore again, and I went and met Sultan Khan, and I just said that I'd like to write a book about your family and your life, and he was like, yeah, sure, move in. And I did say, like, maybe you want to discuss it with your family, and he was like, no, it's not necessary. That was maybe a red flag already, like, okay, so he didn't need to ask anyone else if he was okay with it. So, and then I moved in, not right away, because this was the end of the year. I went home for Christmas and New Year. And again, like, talking about not finding the house, they didn't have a phone. So I just said that I would be back in January sometime. I actually ended up coming back in February, I think. So I had no idea where they lived, but I was like, he's probably going to be in the bookstore. So I flew in with the German forces at the time, because there were no regular flights then, and then I went to the books, and he was there at the bookshop. So, but I wasn't able to tell him that I would come that very day. So it was very much, yeah.
I wonder what life was like in the house for you. I mean, you write these very, very vivid scenes, the meals, the whispers, the family feuds. But for you, as a guest, what did the day-to-day feel like? And why did you then decide not to insert yourself into the narrative?
I remember my editor said something before I started, and he said, like, I would like to have a book that reads like a novel, but with real people. And I think that was the start of it. It was like his idea. And I was thinking, wow, that's a great idea, because I'd written one book only before that from Serbia, which is more like, portrait of people I meet. But as you say, I do meet them. I'm in the story myself. But I was like, okay, I'll try this. And I really enjoy that way of writing because it is truly more literary. But it's much more difficult because the thing is, like, when people tell you things in an interview, you can just quote them. But if you write it in the third person, it really has to be, you really have to know that it's true, because you do write that when he was going around on his way to the bookshop, he was thinking about this and that. I need to know that he was actually thinking of that at the time. So it's a lot of questioning, like, okay, so what did you think of then? Like, what did you see? And it's very detailed, like you need to ask what, because you need to describe maybe a place he went to that you haven't been to, like, how did it look like? What color? So very often people's like, why do you ask all these detailed questions? Like, well, I need to set the scene. So it's an engaging way of writing, but it's quite difficult. And it's also sometimes, you have to be careful that it doesn't fall over into cliches. Because very often when people say something straight, it's a great quote. And then when you say it in third person, it's like, it sounds like it's my language. No, it wasn't it's like, I can't really always use their language straight, because it looks like it's my way of saying it, and that changes the whole scene. So that was just an experiment, actually, and it kind of worked out.
Well, sort of integrating yourself into the space and all the rest of it. And as you write it, you don't editorialize. There's no judgment coming from you. We are just hearing straight what happened to these people. But you do write in the introduction that it made you very angry, not the writing of it, but the things that you witnessed. What provoked that? And what were the moments that pushed you hardest?
It was towards the end, and then it was I was thinking it's time to leave, because I do believe in neutrality, because I'm not there to change one family into my Norwegian view on life. I'm there to observe. So in the beginning, I felt that everything was interesting. Like, I didn't really judge. I was like, aha, so they're eating that way, the women is eating that kind of food, the boys are going out, the girls are not going, just like you're observing it. And I don't then in the beginning say like, that's unfair, why don't the girls go out? Because it's, what kind of book will that be? But when I got really angry the first time was actually a day when Sultan Khan was away. He was on a business trip to Pakistan. So then his oldest son was the man of the family. He was 15 at the time, and a bully, a big bully. And he came in one day without taking off his shoes. And that was a great disrespect. And that's something, I've learned. So we sit down around the stove where they also cook the food. And he's sitting there, with his leg up and showing his shoe to the grandmother. And the mother is crying, the grandmother is crying. He's obviously just testing boundaries. Father is not. And then I get so angry of his kind of, the insult to the family and to the mother and the grandmother. And then I just pick him up and I just take him like on the collar and say, you take your shoes off. And, I just like, ooh. And then I was thinking, maybe it's time to leave. But I do put it in the book actually without myself in that scene, because I can't suddenly put myself in, like the tea comes in and he also lit a cigarette. Like, he's totally misbehaving. Under Afghan standards, he's terrible, but under any standards, it's just terrible. You don't smoke in front of your mother if you're not allowed to. And so and I also, what I learned from that to see him is like, when children grow up under very strict limits, like they don't really learn right or wrong. Well, he was testing limits then, but they don't really learn to judge morally a situation, because so much is not allowed. So suddenly when the father is gone, who's the one who says no, anything is allowed. Like, he could be, as he behaved then, like there are no rules, because the guy who sets the rules is gone. So it's like it's the worst way of bringing up a child, and especially boys. And I see, all over the Middle East, the Saudi princes, or how men treat women, because that is how they been taught to be. That in general, in many different situations, is what, made it just bubble inside of me after a while.
And yet, of course, the matriarch does hold great power.
Yes, absolutely. That, of course, depends on a family, but unfortunately, many of the matriarchs are guarding their position by just prolonging the unfair rules. It's very seldom that it's the matriarch who actually is the liberal one who changes the situation. So matriarchic rule in a patriarchic society is not always freedom, because she has that position because she's been given that position, or because it's an age thing. So in this family, the matriarch was there and was supposed to be listened to, but in this family, she was not very much someone who set rules.
Yeah. And of course, the sort of lowest of the low, if you like, is her youngest daughter, Layla. And we see her struggles. I love the way you write about this in kind of granular detail. We sense the dust that she's constantly battling. You describe to us what it feels like to wear the same burqa day in, day out, how it stinks, how you can't see properly. And of course, she's got desire for freedom and education, but she's completely frustrated.
Yes, and I think that's one of the thing of living in the family. Then you mentioned the dust, because if you see once a young girl, she was 19 then, like every morning. No, if you see her dust once, you say dust, like yeah, with this, is it called a whip, like made out of straw?
A broom, yeah.
A broom. So doing that in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, before going to bed, like, and you just see, but the dust is going nowhere. It's just going around. So it's probably, for me to describe it is because I've just lived it and I see, but the dust is like, that is what symbolizes her life. Because there's not, it never goes anywhere, that dust. It just comes back and comes back and comes back. It's sand all around Afghanistan, so it's that kind of sand dust. And then with all her hopes of fighting her way to, she taught herself English as a brilliant girl, and then to sneak out to learn some more. She wanted to become a teacher, and then Sultan Khan said, no, you're gonna get married, and I'm gonna choose your husband. And she represents so many Afghan women who don't decide for themselves and still don't. So it's, I mean, many people are much worse off because this family is, after all, is well off, kind of. So through that, she has some kind of, something in life that she's not among the poorest. But among the poorest, it's just like life is just work all the time, and without any chance of choosing anything for yourself.
Absolutely. I want to take a reader question now. So Emily asks, how did the family feel when they saw themselves in your books? Did you hear from them directly, and did their reactions surprise you?
Oh yeah, this is a big question because so there was like a family meeting before I started the book. So when I came on that flight from Germany and went the same day into the house, because I met the bookseller in the family in the bookstore. That night or the night after, I wanted to gather everyone and just tell them like the book I wanted to write about the family to symbolize Afghan life. And I told them, you can tell me anything. If you want to withdraw things, please, of course, as long as I'm here, you can withdraw anything you've told me, if there's something. And I felt that I made myself clear there, also in the sense that, but when I've left, what I have is what I, will take with me, because I just knew there was no way there's no way you would like send manuscript. Can you approve this? It's just like, it's not practical. And I also don't think, it was just never on the table to do that. And then some things were withdrawn, but that was, personal stuff. They said, I don't want you to write about that dream I told you about anyway. So things like that. And then the bookseller reads the English translation. That the book has then already been out in Norway, in Sweden, in Denmark, a few other countries, and then comes the English translation. He calls me. This is before it's out, before it's printed actually. But of course the book is, it's like this copy, like a pre-copy. And he reads it, and he calls me and he says like, you need to rewrite the book. And I'm like, oh, are there any mistakes? There's still time to correct. If there's anything? He's like, no, it's not for any mistakes. We have to rewrite the whole book. I'm coming to Oslo. And then he actually comes to Oslo. He gets a Norwegian lawyer. And he says, like, we're going to sit down for 2 weeks. We're going to rewrite the book. And I just say, no, please, I can correct if there's anything. But there's like, there's not like, then he said, no, we have to rewrite the whole thing. So and I remember when he came and I went to see him with my father, because I was thinking, for Afghan men, age is the main thing. So my father was older than he was. Then it was all very respectful, and my mother was making dinner, and he loved the salmon and the broccoli. But then he was like, he got a very wrong Norwegian lawyer who said, like, if you protest on this, you get a lot of money. So it was a trial. So it was a big trial. Went all the way to the Supreme Court, where he lost, and I ended up owing us money instead of, getting the money that he wanted. Of course, we just said, no, of course you're not going to pay for this. But also he didn't end up with anything. We had offered him settlements, for him to be pleased, but he said, no, I just want the big trial. So he was not pleased with the book at all. But then interesting thing is, like, he still sold the book in the bookstore. So I got messages from Norwegian soldiers who were there, and he had this business card saying, I am the bookseller of Kabul. And the book was on display. And if I can move fast forward and tell you that I went back 20 years after, like, to see the bookstore. So when I wrote my new book on Afghanistan, like in 2022, 20 years after, I was thinking, I'm not gonna see the family, because it's like, it was, conflicts. And I was like, I'm doing now something else. Taliban is back. It's like new people. Now it's about the Taliban. And then the last night I was there, I went on several trips to Afghanistan, but on the very last night, on the very last trip, I woke up in the middle of the night thinking, I have to go to the bookstore. How can I not go? And I had an evening flight. So the next morning I went with Ariana, who's a character in the book. We went up the stairs. Going up the stairs, I'm not in a burqa, but I'm fully covered, like hair and just my face showing like this. And as I come up, a guy says, are you Åsne? And I say, yes. And he's like, yeah, I remember I was 11 years old when you were here. Now he was like 31. He was the cousin. He ran the bookstore now, because I think Sultan Khan is actually in London. And his kids are everywhere. One is in Canada, one is in Pakistan. So they're doing their book business still. And he was like, let's do a selfie. Let's put it on Instagram. Let's put it on Facebook. So we took, and then I got so happy because of the conflict, but that he was so proud. And he's like, the author is back. And we were on Instagram, and he keeps on, posting things. This was the day when the author was back. So then I realized it hadn't been that bad for the family after all. But of course, I learned a lot from it myself. And what has changed for me is that I'm showing everyone everything. So it's worth it. Like, it's better than that people are pleased with their stories because for me, it's also like, I had that scandal. I can't have it twice. So I'm extra cautious now with people approving their text. And actually, most of the times, or almost always, it just becomes better. Yeah. Because they will say, oh, that's not how it was. It was more like this. And then it's usually more details, more, yeah.
And you point that out, actually, in your next book, The Afghans, 3 Lives Through War, Love and Revolt, how much you give them the right. They see the text. You always make sure your recording device is on the table. Everybody knows what's going on, so that this really can't happen again. I wanted to talk about the 3 lives that you follow within your next book. And so, of course, this happens after the Taliban is back, but kind of in that era where they're trying to tell the world that they're okay. I mean, you even joke with one of them, you'd have kidnapped me last time.
Yes, yeah. Well, then I went back because it was a shock for all of us that so sudden Taliban took over. and won against or over the most powerful army in the world, the Americans and all of NATO. So it's like my goal was like to try to find out who are those people now that we can finally talk to them, because as you said, like, had I gone before, this Taliban official that I spent time with his family, he was a moneymaker for the Taliban, and that was abductions and kidnappings and extortion. So he was actually he was set on death row in Afghanistan after many years of fighting with the Haqqani group, which was the most brutal group and behind most of the terror attacks against the Western forces and NATO forces and the Afghan new government. So he was totally our enemy during those 20 years. And suddenly I could talk to him, and then that sentence when I asked, well, had I come earlier, you would have kidnapped me. And he was like, sure, of course. Of course. That was his role then, and people are sometimes their role. But this time I really wanted to understand not just the Taliban movement that we knew quite a lot about, but the Talibans as individuals. What made their how did their worldview look like? How did they live? What motivated them? And then I moved in with him and his 2 wives, going on the 3rd one. He was engaged to the 3rd wife, and how it's also all those weird things, like now that the 2 wives actually both loved him very much, and he loved them. That's how it looked like. But important man like him should also have a 3rd one, and a 16-year-old that he was then engaged to. And then the 2nd wife told me, I'm looking for the 4th one. And I'm like, you're looking for the 4th? You are looking for the 4th one? And she was like, well, yeah, and I'm the one who's going to spend time with her. I'd rather decide myself. And she was then looking for a doctor. I'd rather he finds a doctor, because we would need that in the family now that, female education is off. So it's also this weird way of thinking that is kind of logical too. Like, because it's hurtful, even though they, in Islam, in Afghanistan, a man can have 4 wives. In this household, it's still painful, even though it's allowed. Anyone of the audience can also imagine, like, it's also very painful. It's like an insult. It feels like an insult, even though it's allowed. And understanding her that, I'm going to pick her, it puts her a bit like above somehow.
Yeah. And I mean, that this guy Bashir, I mean, you go into his childhood, you see how he's been terribly damaged, and you can see the circumstances around what made him what he is. But I mean, is he a villain? Is he a survivor? Is it something more complicated?
Well, I think we all are part of our culture around us. And I think he's a great example of that. Like, his father is killed when he's 3 months old by Soviet forces. And the mother decides, like, she's very tough. She is a true matriarch, actually, more than in the Bookseller's family. Like, she decides, I'm never going to marry again. So she is because as a widowed woman, she has more power than as a widow. You're gonna always become a 2nd wife or a 3rd wife. You're never gonna be the 1st wife again, ever. So and she's then marrying off her children from the age of 1 or 2 or 3. Like, she's managing that whole. She's a very bright woman, and so in the beginning, there's the Swedish Afghan committee. They have schools all across Afghanistan. So Bashir goes 2 years in that kind of a public school. Then he's off to a Quran school, because things are tightening up with the arrival of the Taliban that comes when he's about 9 years old. Exactly, when he's in 3rd grade. So it's only Quran schools. And of course, if you fill a child up with Quran school only, they rejoice when when jihad started, and when he was 12, he left. He left his house to join these insurgents of the Haqqani network. They just laughed at him and sent him back because he was too young, but they took him when he was 14. And then he was allowed to carry a weapon when he started to grow a beard. So he's just grown into that worldview, that system. And to kill someone in a war, you are allowed to kill soldiers, but he was also doing terror attacks. He was educating suicide bombers, and so just as you said with the bookseller, I'm trying to do this neutral, so that the reader will also get to know him from the inside. And there's a scene. There was a reader telling me, because there's he's for the first time he's fighting face to face with Americans. And he knows that the bad fighters will have to become suicide, the younger ones to become suicide bombers instead, if you can't really fight and handle a gun. So he got 5 kind of small rockets that he put into a rocket launcher. He fails with the first one. He fails with the second one. It just falls out and it disappears down the stone wall. And he has starting on the third one, and an older Taliban is coming. I'm taking over, and he knows that if I don't, hit the Americans now, it's over. And then this reader told me that she'd been like, he has to hit them, he must hit them, because she was in his head, knowing if he fails now, it's over for him. And then he hits the tanks of the Americans on the third one. At least that's what he says. So it's I think that's the power of literature, to not to approve or anything like that, just to understand how that from childhood, 3 months old, losing the father, he's also fighting for his dead father. Had we known and understood more of the Taliban, maybe they wouldn't have won. Maybe we would have conquered them differently, because they are in power now, and they are in power because we failed. And it's a terrible thing to think about, how we failed, and how we failed all these women, Layla and her daughters now, who are back in the same terrible, dark regime of the Taliban, and is getting worse by the day. Every day, there's a new rule and it's always going in the same way, less freedoms or more restrictions for women. And I don't really see a light, any much light in the tunnel for Afghan women now.
Despite the work of people like Jamila, who you write about, she's an activist. She risks everything to fight for women's rights. You actually met her. You saw her first, I think, on television or a conference in Norway. Just give us a snapshot of her story.
Yes, well, Jamila she's like a true Islamic feminist. That's what she calls herself. And she's a true revolutionary coming from a very conservative family. She's born in 1976, so just ahead of the Soviet invasion in Kabul. And she, on the first page of the book, this is the Afghan, so the new book, on the first page of the book, she's almost dying of a very high fever. And this family don't believe in doctors. They only believe in the Quran. So they're trying to give her medicine, which is basically Quran verses put in water. And the fever goes down. So they thank Allah for that. But then after a few months, the mother realizes that her foot is limp. And the reader will know, this is polio. She can no longer walk. And that is what sets her fate. Because in that household, the girls of the family are an item to be sold. And your worth grows if you if no one's ever seen you, no one's ever heard your voice, or even no one knows your name. Like then you get a higher price than if you're kind of solid by, being seen. So the daughters, her sisters, her bigger sisters, are living a very secluded life. Jamila is different because nobody's going to marry her. She has polio. She's like the shame of the family, because handicap in Afghanistan is very often seen upon, like, someone looked at her with evil eye, there's something wrong with the family. But she sees the books of her bigger brothers. She wants to learn to read and write, and she asks the father, can I go to school for 1 year? And he approves, because, feels sorry for her. And next year, 1 more year, 1 more year, 1 more year. And in the end, he says, if you ask me one more time about 1 more year, I'll cut that finger off. But she ends up with a master's degree. She makes it because she is so tough with her crutches. And then so this is, they moved to Pakistan during the first Taliban time. When she comes back after, at the time where I wrote The Bookseller of Kabul, 2002, she's coming back to Afghanistan, starting schools all over, starting classes, programs. Like, she's doing really everything to emancipate women and to, for them to go to school too. And then she says, like, the blessing is, my illness, the fact that I can even do this. And she was there until the takeover of the Taliban, where she had to flee because she had many enemies, and she came to Norway for that reason. And but her office was still working in Kabul without her. So that is also part of the book, how Jamila's office, how they're protesting the school ban, the new school ban of the Taliban. And it's so, to the shock, her shock, the teacher's shock, that's really to be present that day where the schools were supposed to reopen in March 2022, after being closed because of the war. And the Taliban were so late to decide. So it's like the schools do open. The girls go to school, and they haven't been in schools for years. And it's open for about half an hour. They'd just given out the timetable, the pencils, the books, and the girls are just like so happy. And then comes the new order from the Taliban. All girls need to go home on, what do you say when it's like an open end? They don't say how long, but they also don't say indefinitely. So yeah, the girls need to go home until we tell them to come back. And that, until we tell them to come back, that time has not come yet. And this is now many years ago. Like, that's the saddest thing. And one of the other, Ariana in the book, the young girl who lost everything with the new arrival of the Taliban, she has started in her cellar with her mother and the other teachers who lost their jobs. She started like a secret school. And it's, history repeats itself, but there are lots of strong women who actually, don't give up and just hope for a better day, and then to be prepared when those days come.
I want to rattle through some audience questions because we have a few here and not a huge amount of time. David asks, would you ever return to Kabul under Taliban rule now?
Well, maybe I wouldn't get in. That's another thing with the Taliban. They become so restricted of giving out visas. And I think with this book, I may not be able to come back. But also in general, like when I went, which was quite right after, it wasn't that difficult to get a visa and accreditation. It's like many of these dictatorships around the world are also very bureaucratic. But I hear and I see these days, like, it's almost impossible to get those visas, and the Taliban will question you and try to find out what you're doing. And if you write something negatively, of course, it's easier for me who write originally in Norwegian. So that is one thing. It's very difficult, but And it's scary too. ISIS has started to roam the streets, and so Taliban is not even your greatest threat. It's ISIS, the ISIS-K, which is that regional part of ISIS. So for the moment, as I'm also working on something else, I'm not risking it for the moment. But I'm also saying to myself sometimes, well, I did one book in 2002. And one in 2022. And maybe I'll go to Afghanistan with a 20-year time span, because I do believe that journalism and authorship is a lifelong thing, that we are very lucky, like writers, we don't really go, I mean, as long as we can write, we don't and write something that feels actual, no one's going to tell us we're too old. So I hope to be doing this reporting in different parts of the world, like, until I kneel.
Fiona asks, did you ever fear for your safety or the safety of the people you wrote about?
In Afghanistan, well, I was very lucky with the two long periods I was there. 2002 first, the Taliban was still afraid of the Americans and the bombs and all that, and the NATO forces that gone into the country. The terror, the terror attacks hadn't started yet, and for the first time, so we could go we took the car with one of this, this mean son of the Sultan Khan, who was actually also a very funny 15-year-old. Also very, a person is a very complex being. So we went all the way to Mazar-e-Sharif. That journey wouldn't be possible for another 20 years to take. So I was able to travel around the country. And the same thing happened when I came back then, the fall of Kabul, 2021. I went there beginning of 22. Again, it was the same. It was a bit that wary situation where you could suddenly travel again. And I did not feel afraid from the Taliban on my second trip, because this was the time where the Taliban tried to be more than they do now. They tried to be normal. They tried to be, we want to be respected. We want to be, maybe get a recognition from more than just, the United Emirates. So I wasn't, it would be a scandal for them if something happened to a foreign journalist, but I was afraid of ISIS. And that's why I also always traveled around in a burqa, because, if you travel in a burqa, you will just blend in most of the time. But if you're not, there were very few foreigners there. So you would stay out. And as you just need a guy with a gun who thinks that he will go to paradise more easily if he kills an infidel. So I was not afraid, but I was very, very, very careful.
Rachel wants to know, what responsibility do we as readers carry after engaging with these stories?
Well, that is up to everyone to decide. There is many organizations who are still in Afghanistan for aid and help. I do a lot of aid myself. For instance, giving to Ariana's homeschool. I actually bought them a flat to stay in. Everyone can do whatever they can. And I think that is, for her, I mean, not to support her in general, it could be anyone, but those homeschools are really the pens and paper and books. It's very affordable. So if you meant it in what can I do for the women of Afghanistan, that's something several organizations organize, even during the Taliban. And it's also, what is hopeful a little bit is that in the regions, there are many projects happening that is kind of happening under the gaze of the Taliban. They don't really care. And a friend of mine who's an aid worker and also speaks Pashto, she said that she's traveling right now, actually, this very week, starting in Kabul, then down to Kandahar, so in the real Pashto areas. And most of the Taliban are so frustrated because they say, my daughter is at home crying for not going to school. So the thing is, like, most even of the Taliban, they don't want this school ban, but it's a religious hierarchy that makes it this way. Like there's a God-given leader on the top, or like the power is God-given. Like that's how. So nothing can, if he decides something, no, it can't be changed. But when he goes, hopefully there will be a more moderate Taliban. Of course, that's not rosy, but if that can change for at least for the girls who go to school, it's a huge impact. So that's what she tells, like in the regions, like people are not as evil as they can look like. With, I mean, the policy is evil. I have to use that word, but further down there is hope, actually.
Alice wants to know, after reading this, what should be next on our reading list?
Of books on Afghanistan?
I think so. I think possibly that's what she means.
Wow.
I mean, there are a couple, I think. So this company, Untold Narratives, did a book called My Pen is the Wing of a Bird, and that's 18 writers, all women, came together and put these short stories together. And then, of course, the Taliban came back and they came out with another book called My Dear Kabul, which is sort of their diary as they scattered to all corners of the world. I think both of those books very much speak to what you're saying in your book.
Oh, that's great recommendations, because that is, I mean, the Afghans telling their own stories. That is one thing that has been, if we can say, like, what has been achieved those 20 years that ended in tragedy with the Taliban takeover. But you have a much more educated population, especially women, but in general. And the fact that they are able to write their own stories and also to get those stories out, that is, I just approve the message from Georgina.
And Fred's question is very simple. What are you working on now?
You know, I'm going back to where I started, which is actually Russia. I moved to Russia when I was just 20, with Russian grammar under my in my hands, and started to learn Russian. And then, as I mentioned, my first war in Chechnya when I was 24. And then I worked there as a correspondent. I've written one book from Chechnya, which is called The Angel of Grozny. If you want to have that on your reading list, it's important because Chechnya is Putin's war on a smaller scale, but with the same attributes as with his war in Ukraine. Like, he wants to be in control and terrorizes the population with, filtration camps and torture and carpet bombing. So it's really the preludium to what we see in Ukraine today is part of his empire building.
And of course, all your other work is available, and you can buy most of them through the Hay Festival Bookshop, or indeed wherever you get your books. Do support your local independent shop. Åsne Seierstad, thank you so much. This has been absolutely lovely, and thank you for your fearless reporting, your brilliant storytelling, and your honesty this evening. It has really, really been appreciated.
Thank you so much. It's been really nice talking to you too.
Thank you all for joining us too at the Hay Festival Book Club. This event has been recorded and it will be available to watch again shortly on the Hay Festival website. So that's it. And the dogs stay quiet. Result. Thank you. Good night.